The cool thing about the chameleon hobby is that we're constantly learning, which means we are challenging and changing the way that we take care of our chameleons to give them longer, healthier lives, which is great. But that means sometimes our information and care is out of date and we need to adapt and grow to make sure that we're following best practices and doing everything we can to give our chameleons awesome lives. So with that being said, I have a video, how to water your chameleon, which is my most popular video on the channel so far, but it's a year and a half old at this point. So some of that information in there is out of date and I want to make sure that I'm providing you guys with the most accurate care information. So I'm going to be taking that video down and replacing it with this one. So without further ado, let's get into how to water a chameleon version 2. I think it's important that we discuss humidity levels. Humidity is how much water vapor is in the air, so this is going to be important when it comes to setting up the environment with your chameleon. This is also going to influence your misting schedule, which is why I want to talk about this now before we get into all that. So each species of chameleon has different humidity level requirements based off of their environment and needs. So a panther chameleon is going to need a daytime humidity range of 50 to 60%. A veiled chameleon is going to need a daytime humidity range of 30 to 40%, and a Jackson's chameleon is going to need 30 to 50%. As you can see, they have slightly different humidity levels, so that's something you may want to consider when you're choosing which chameleon is best for you. Nighttime humidity for all species of chameleon should be 70% or higher. You'll sometimes hear people say 100% humidity is what they have in the wild, which is great. And if we were in the wild, like, that would be awesome. However, I'm trying to be realistic that we live in homes with walls and drywall and all that, and it's unrealistic for us to try and keep our chameleons at 100% humidity at night, which is why I think the more realistic recommendation is 70% at night. The reason for this is we want the spike at night and then drop during the daytime, and we'll get into that a little bit on in the video. The way that you can measure your humidity is with what's called a hygrometer. So there are a few different ones you can get. I'm going to recommend a digital hygrometer. I find these to be much more accurate than the ones that have the little plastic bit. Keep in mind, most hygrometers are not waterproof, so I put mine in there, figure out what my humidity level is after a few minutes, and then I take it out so that I can mist and fog and drip, and I'll put water inside the enclosure. But that way you know your ranges are correct. Keep in mind your humidity levels might change as the seasons of your living environment change. So depending where you live, you may need to figure out ways to increase the humidity or decrease the humidity. For example, if you were living in Colorado or a state that is considered very dry and you were keeping a species that required higher humidity, like a panther chameleon, you may find it challenging to raise your humidity levels to what a panther chameleon needs. So some ways you can do that are wrapping the sides of the screen enclosure with shower curtain. I just use a clear one that I picked up from the Dollar Tree. That's a great option. Some keepers will choose to keep their chameleons in glass enclosures, and I think my personal preference is to use a hybrid enclosure, which is a mixture of PVC and screen. These are currently being made by Dragon Strand, so I'll link those down below if you want to check those out. That's a great option. Another way to increase your humidity levels are to use live plants. Humidity is naturally produced by the plants. Not only does the soil hold moisture, that's a great option, as well as live plants are safer for your chameleon in case they accidentally eat them or they choose to eat them versus a plastic one. They can not process that, get impacted, and that can cause issues down the road. And the last option would be to get a humidifier for the room, so then the overall ambient humidity is much higher in the room that you keep your chameleons in. Alternatively, if you're having issues of your humidity being too high, say you live in Florida, a very humid state, and you're keeping a species that needs a little bit drier environment like a veiled chameleon, then you may want to consider getting a dehumidifier and make sure that you're using a screen enclosure to get as much airflow and then try and pull that humidity level down for the species of your chameleon. Let's talk a little bit about how a chameleon actually stays hydrated. So, true or false? Do chameleons drink water? The answer is true. Another one, true or false? Do chameleons breathe in water vapor? The answer to that one is also true. And the last one is, do chameleons absorb water through their skin? The answer for that one is false. So I'll quickly touch on that one and then we'll get to the first two. So Chameleons are reptiles. They are not amphibians. They do not absorb water through their skin. This is total bogus. This is not this is not possible with how a chameleon is built. So no, they don't do that. The two ways that a chameleon does stay hydrated is through physically drinking water and through breathing in moist air. So this next part is where it gets a little confusing and where there's changes being made to chameleon husbandry as we're trying to get closer and closer to what chameleons experience in the wild. So based off of people going to Madagascar, into Yemen, and observing chameleons in the wild, we're leaning towards what's called a naturalistic hydration cycle. And what we have found through, I haven't been, but what have other people have found through these observations is that chameleons are actually getting a vast majority of their hydration at night. We're like, whoa, what? Because past chameleon husbandry has been to blast them with a mister and a dripper all day, every day, and if you don't see your chameleon drink, like, bad news. That's now becoming incorrect information, and this is where we're changing how we care for our chameleons. So what's actually being understood is that chameleons are getting a vast majority of their hydration at night, which is why you're seeing more and more keepers fog their chameleons at night. That's why I'm recommending that you try and get that humidity level up at night, because as your chameleon is sleeping, the fog will roll in the wild, so they're breathing the fog, air that has a higher humidity and that moisture in the air. When it comes to misting your chameleon, there's a few different options. You can do something as simple as a $1 bottle from the dollar store and spray your chameleon that way. This is your cheapest option, but also your most inconvenient. Not only does your hand get tired, but you have to be there to do it. A step up from that would be a pressurized misting bottle sprayer thingy. And this is great because now your hand's not having to pump it, but again, you are having to do it manually. Those are both very, very cost-effective ways. What I recommend and what most keepers do is use an automatic misting system. While there are a few on the market, the Mist King misting system is by far the best misting system that you can get for your chameleon. Not only is the mist finer, it's very, very, very customizable, not only with the water reserve, but also with the timer. Other misters out there, their spray is much harsher and their timers don't even provide the correct options that a chameleon needs, which we're going to get into here in a second. A big question that I get asked is, how often do I mist my chameleon? Now this is going to go back to those environmental factors I was talking about earlier. It's going to depend on what kind of species you have and their humidity requirements. It's also more importantly going to depend on your environment. You live in a drier or more humid climate. So what I'm going to give you is a general recommendation, but please customize it, adjust it. Do you need a longer session? Do you need a shorter session? That's going to depend on your environment. That being said, the general recommendation is 2 to 4 minutes once in the morning, a half hour before your lights turn on, and then 2 to 4 minutes in the evening, a half hour after your lights turn off. The reason for this is 2 to 4 minutes is usually enough time for your chameleon to be like, whoa, what's that? Oh, hey look, there's a mister. Maybe I should go over there and drink from it. That's also enough time for your enclosure to get a nice misting where there's a nice moisture on the leaves and it gets a nice, without being like enough water without getting soaked, right? So that's a good range to aim for. The reason why I'm recommending a half hour before lights turn on and lights turn off is because we want to avoid moist, hot environments. The reason for this is because hot and wet typically are not great for the chameleon's upper respiratory system. And we have found with time that hot, humid environments, one, are not what chameleons really experience in the wild, and two, can lead to respiratory issues. It used to be recommended to mist your chameleon 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night, but more and more keepers are taking that afternoon session out and just doing morning, evening. That way your environment is staying hot and dry, cool and wet. And it's really not necessary, because if you have that increase in humidity in the evening, then you should be able to have a properly hydrated chameleon without it. If you're currently doing a middle of the day session, I'm going to challenge you. Take out that middle session and then see if your chameleon is still showing signs of being hydrated. More often than not, then they're totally fine without needing that middle session. And then just 2 pro tips, because I know one of you at least is going to ask me this. How can I avoid water from spraying onto my walls. If you can wrap the sides, that'll prevent your walls from getting sprayed. Also, if you have a hybrid enclosure, that's another benefit of the hybrid, not only the humidity, but it also can help keep the water inside. But strategically place your nozzle. Like if you have them pointing out, then water's gonna go out. Have them pointing in a little bit. Some people also will keep like tarps or towels underneath their enclosures to help keep the water from getting off of like hardwood floors or carpet or things like that. So that could be an option as well. Another question or comment I get is like, my chameleon doesn't like being sprayed. Spray your chameleon, like spray around your chameleon. There's zero reason to be spraying your chameleon directly. That's not the point. We're trying to increase the humidity and give them drinking opportunities, not spray right at them. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be sprayed directly at, so don't do that for your chameleon. Two other questions I get asked are the kind of water and the temperature of the water. The kind of water is going to depend on where you live, because a lot of people ask me if they can use tap water. But if you know anything about tap water, it varies city to city, and the water quality varies city to city, state to state, country to country. So I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to your tap water. Research it. Learn about your city's water content, and if it seems to be okay and safe to drink, then it may be okay to use for a chameleon. If it's not, then you may want to consider other options. What most keepers do is use RO water or reverse osmosis water. Some keepers use bottled water, and some keepers use a Brita filter. I'm team Brita filter. My tap water is safe to drink and it's safe where I live, but I take it a little safer and make sure I use a Brita filter. Some people will ask if they can use ReptiSafe, some sort of water conditioner. You can. I don't think that's really recommended anymore for chameleons. I think people are just using RO water or some sort of filtration system instead of using ReptiSafe. As far as the temperature goes, room temperature is totally fine. I have a bucket that I keep on my counter, and that's what I use for my misting system and my drippers and things like that. So that room temperature is totally fine. I personally would avoid using cold water because that's probably not fun to get sprayed with. Additionally, I would avoid using hot water. What is hot for us is going to be scalding hot for a chameleon, so try and keep it room temperature water and you'll be good to go. You also have what's called a dripper at your disposal. A dripper is any sort of container that is on the outside of the enclosure that provides water at a consistent rate dripping onto the leaves inside the enclosure, which provides a drinking opportunity for your chameleon. This is a great plan B, because if your hydration cycle is on point, your humidity levels are on point, your misting system is on point, foggers, all that, then you shouldn't necessarily need a dripper, but it can be beneficial for your plants, but also give your chameleon a drinking opportunity. And there's three drippers. There's the big dripper, the little dripper, and then a homemade dripper. There's zero difference between the big and little dripper other than the size of the dripper itself. I think they're pricey for what they are. People end up poking holes in their screen, which you don't need to do. You can just put the tube on the outside, or you can just take the tube out and just have it drip from the nozzle part. What I do is I make a homemade dripper. I just take a plastic container. I typically use milk gallons, rinse them out really good, and then take a thumbtack and just poke a small hole at the bottom. That's it. It's super simple. And then in the morning, I just fill it up with usually 5 to 8 seconds, that works for me, of water, and then I put that on top of my enclosure and strategically place it so that it drips onto a multitude of leaves inside the enclosure. Sometimes my chameleons drink from this, sometimes they don't. It kind of varies. One thing I do get asked when it comes to drippers, what do you do with the excess water? I make sure I put my dripper over a plant so that it's going into the pot of the plant to catch the water that way. I'm also not putting tons of water in there to begin with, just a little bit of drips for my chameleon, and that's it. Lastly, we have the fogger. So if we remember, our chameleons are breathing in that moisture because they're breathing out the moisture, so we gotta replace it. So what we can do is have a fogger go off at night. The reason for this is, again, we want moist, cold environment. We don't want moist, hot environments. And so what you can do is have your mister go off for that 30 minutes after the lights turn off. You'll have a nice dew drop, and then you can start to have your fogger go off There's no exact science of when your fogger should start to go off. I think, again, this is going to depend on your humidity of your natural environment. If you live somewhere dry, you may want to start sooner into the night. If you live somewhere that's already humid, then you may not even need to use the fogger because the humidity is high enough, or you do it later in the evening. But typically what's recommended is around midnight. Then you can have about 30 minutes on, 30 minutes off, so then you don't, overload the enclosure with fog, but that way it's getting that humidity level up and providing the moisture in the air for your chameleon to drink. Then you would have that stop in the morning before lights turn on, and then your mister would go off, that half hour before, and again have that dew waiting for your chameleon, similarly to what they would experience in the wild. There are a couple different foggers on the market. You can also use a humidifier if that's something that interests you, but that's obviously going to do more than just the enclosure. But you could do like a humidifier and then run some like tubing, and then you can have that point into the enclosure, having it come from the top, so then the fog is falling down onto the enclosure, similarly with how natural fog is. A common mistake I see is people using foggers during the daytime. This is not the way that you want to increase your humidity levels, because again, it's putting moisture with that heat. So reference back my other ways that you can increase your daytime humidity besides using a fogger, because you don't want to do that. So we've got our mister, our dripper, our fogger, our hygrometer, our correct humidity levels. We've got this entire hydration cycle. Great. How can I tell my chameleon is staying hydrated? The easiest, most accurate way to tell is through their poop. With chameleon poop, you've got two parts: the brown poop part and the urate, which is the equivalent of chameleon pee. What you're looking for is a mostly cream color. It used to be thought that orange was bad. Again, changes in husbandry, we're learning. It's actually very rare to see a wild chameleon with a totally white urate. It's very, very common to see orange in the urate. So now the recommendation is up to 50% orange in the urate is considered okay. Issues arise when the entire thing is orange or shriveled up. So as long as your urate has mostly white in it with some orange, up to 50%, then your chameleon is staying hydrated. It's very common to not see your chameleon drink, and it's very common for new keepers that totally freak out because they're like, I don't see my chameleon drinking. So then they miss their enclosure like 12 times. Like, deep breath. Chameleons are shy drinkers. Think about it. In order for them to drink, they have to take their eyes off you, the predator. They're not as vigilant as they're drinking. So there's an immense level of trust in the chameleon drinking in front of you, so it's not a common occurrence. Another way that you can tell your chameleon is staying hydrated is by their eyes. Chameleon eyes should be nice, plump, and round. If they're sunken in, that can be a sign of dehydration. This can also be a sign of stress. So you need to use your environmental clues to figure out why your chameleon's eyes are sunken in. If you're handling your chameleon, if they're chilling on your arm or you're just staring and watching them, odds are you're stressing them out because you're this big scary creature, so their eyes are being sunken in that way. If your chameleon does have a weird poop, maybe it is more orange than normal, give them another poop. And if that one's still more orange, then make adjustments to your hydration cycle. If your chameleon is showing signs of dehydration, or maybe you have rescued a chameleon, some great ways are hornworms. They are very, very high in moisture and water content. These are a great treat, but they're also a good way to hydrate your chameleon. Additionally, if you feed your chameleon a bunch of hornworms, then they may have a more watery poop as a result, but that can be a way that you can hydrate a dehydrated chameleon. Previously, showers used to be recommended for chameleons, and I actually recommended them in my older video, but I've realized that out of context, that doesn't really, they're not really recommended. So I would not try to shower your chameleon or do anything of the sort that can just cause stress for your chameleon, and apologies to anyone where I made that recommendation. I no longer recommend showers for a chameleon. I think they're much safer alternatives that do just as good of a job. Another thing that people do is they try to bathe their chameleon. Chameleons are not aquatic at all, and if you remember what I said earlier, they do not absorb water through their skin. This can be very, 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 very stressful for your chameleon. And while they're not outwardly showing signs of stress, this is not recommended. I know sometimes vets recommend this, and I'm just going to say there are much better alternatives to trying to hydrate your chameleon or getting your chameleon to poop, because sometimes people try to soak them in warm water to make them poop. Just not recommended. Another mistake I see new keepers make is trying to put in waterfalls or water features inside their enclosure. This is not recommended. They can be a source for bacteria. Imagine if a dead bug gets in there or a piece of poop gets in there and you aren't able to clean it out fast enough, then bacteria is going to grow in there, and chameleon and internal systems are very sensitive, and it's just not a safe option. There are much better alternatives, and it's just not a risk I'm willing to take with my chameleons, and not something I would ever recommend for you guys. And the last thing I would avoid doing is pipette or syringe hydrating your chameleon. This should be done in instances where you have a sick chameleon, or you're trying to rehab a chameleon, or you're under the instructions of a vet. But the anatomy of the chameleon mouth and throat with their tongue can get a little complicated, and you don't want to put water where it's not supposed to be. There's also no real reason to do this. People are like, oh, well, my chameleon will only drink if it's from a pipette. But odds are your chameleon isn't going to drink in front of you anyways. So if you're not seeing them drink but their urids are looking good, then like leave them alone. They're doing their chameleon thing. There's no need to syringe or pipette or anything like that. Your big component when we're talking about chameleons is water, and there's a lot of water involved. So then how do I as a keeper deal with all the water? The drippers, the misters, the foggers. So we need to come up with some sort of drainage system. The most common thing keepers do is put their chameleons on wire racks. This way they can have the screen enclosure, the water goes through the screen and then into a bucket. Some people like me have custom drainage systems where the water comes through the PVC floor, through some hole in the ground, and then gets down a pipe and then is caught in a bucket. A very, very easy way to help with drainage is to just fill the bottom of the enclosure with potted live plants, because the plants are going to absorb the water. Not only is it beneficial for your plants, it helps get rid of some of the excess water. Additionally, some people will have bioactive enclosures where there's soil in the bottom and isopods and a drainage layer and all that. I will link down in the description a great resource on how to set up a bioactive enclosure. I know I threw a lot of information at you guys, but hopefully this can help you feel comfortable and confident in how to hydrate your chameleon. I tried to anticipate some of your common questions, but if not, feel free to leave them down below and I'll do my very best to answer them. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe so you know when I post a new video, and you can follow Neptune and all my chameleons on Instagram at Neptune the Chameleon. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day. Bye! I need to make sure I stay hydrated. If you have a pressurized mister and you don't want to have to hold it there, just hang it from the top and then come back in like 2 to 4 minutes and your whole enclosure will be misted. Life hack.